It's more and more common now for one of the defining features of a video game, especially a AAA video game, to be how cinematic it is. This is one of the most cited features when talking about the storytelling power of games, but is the ability to replicate the way a different medium tells stories the best we can hope for from games? Or is this just one limited way in which they can weave a narrative, as they are still finding their feet with a form of storytelling that no other medium can replicate? Hi everyone, I'm Phil, and you're watching UnCapt Gaming. Recently, after getting my 1000th kill in Uncharted 4, I was rewarded with the trophy called Ludonarrative Dissonance. What developers Naughty Dog were hanging a lampshade on here is actually a fairly common criticism of modern video games. The mechanics of the gameplay, particularly combat which involves killing, sits at odds with the story of the game, told mainly through cutscenes. In this example, we have Nathan Drake, the character, dragged unwillingly into a caper and struggling with the impact on his family life, whilst I, as the player, joyfully slaughter my way through the combat encounters. There are debates on the usefulness, or otherwise, of the term, particularly as a criticism. Regardless of that though, this example does point to the fact that the story of most games is disconnected from the mechanics. Cutscenes halt the gameplay entirely to tell the story, barring the occasional quick-time event or other interactive element, whilst in-game dialogue is abruptly cut short when the player chooses to wander off and do gamey things. That's not to say that this is a bad thing. There are plenty of games whose story and characterization, told in this traditional manner, has rightly been praised. But what about story forms that no other medium can emulate? Not all video game narratives are linear. Even going back to the era of the PlayStation 1, games such as the first Resident Evil had multiple endings, and which one you got was dependent upon gameplay choices. Taking this idea further, games like Detroit Become Human are filled with a wide array of narrative choices that are embedded into the game mechanics. These choices can determine not only which characters live and which die, but also wholly change the ending of the game in all sorts of ways, great and small. However, this approach is, in essence, a digital take on the old choose-your-own-adventure books. Not to mention that, in practice, most such games still have a predetermined through-line for their plots that player choice only tinkers at the edges of. We can see this in games such as Telltale's The Walking Dead, where the choice to save one character over another in an early episode doesn't alter that character's role in a later plotline, only who's taken on that role. Even with games like Detroit, whose script was 2,000 pages long and which genuinely does have real variation in story direction, the narrative can't compete in terms of emotional attachments and character development with more linear stories with shorter scripts, but far more time dedicated to consistent characterization and plot. Not to mention that this still isn't something only video games can do. Black Mirror Bandersnatch essentially employed the same mechanics in a Netflix film. The fact that other mediums besides games can do these things doesn't make them bad, or mean that they should never be used. But if we want to see what storytelling forms are truly unique to games, and how they might evolve in the future, we have to dig deeper. Though still in its infancy in many ways, the Nemesis system employed by Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor, and Shadow of War is worth a look here. In that game, procedural generation, a concept players of roguelikes from Enter the Gungeon to Returnal will already be intimately familiar with, is used to build unique villains whose look, name and personality you won't encounter twice. From there, the game catalogues the player's actions so that the orcs can reference this in dialogue, whether it's you running away from a battle, leaving an enemy for dead, or even dying yourself. The enemies have their own allegiances and rivalries, with their roles, missions and hierarchies shifting through randomly generated choices that affect the underlying narrative. Mark Brown from Game Maker's Toolkit has done an excellent video on the full workings of the Nemesis system, which I'd highly recommend. For us, what's important is that procedural generation doesn't just produce interesting and challenging level variation, but also narrative variation too. If we can speculate on the evolution of this, it's easy enough to envision games which go much further than having enemies or allies react to you differently depending on your choices, but have that shape the entire direction of the plot and how the character relationships develop. Instead of this requiring a game with a 2,000-page script, which still runs into limitations because it's not possible to account for every single possible permutation of choices in a manuscript, we effectively get the game's AI acting as the virtual version of a dungeon master in a tabletop game, reacting to your choices in real time to shift the direction of the story. At present, these variations still need some level of scripting, And of course, all possible variables and dialogue need to be recorded by a voice actor. That may not be the case forever, both as AI develops and thanks to just how much technology like text-to-speech is improving, as we can see if we use TikTok to make Disney characters say funny things.
Funny things on TikTok. Yes, there was a bad joke. Sue me.
This isn't to say that cinematic, linear story games will go away, nor that they should. Most of my favourite games fit very neatly into that category. But even games with a predetermined start and end could in some cases benefit from the possibilities of more variation in the middle. We also aren't about to see the end of environmental storytelling, where the world tells us about itself as we pick through the environments, or of games like Journey, Shadow of the Colossus, and others, where the stories we're told largely happen without such cumbersome things as dialogue and lots of cutscenes. But if anything, procedural generation and AI offers even more possibilities for variation in these kinds of storytelling, meaning that games allow for a potentially infinite number of alternatives based on a player's individual choices, and meaning that gameplay really does drive the story. All of which, in both isolation and combination, means that there are lots of exciting possibilities in terms of what video games as an art form can do that books, film, and other mediums cannot. If you've enjoyed this video, then give it a like and consider subscribing if you aren't already. What do you want to see more of as video games develop their own truly unique ways of telling stories? Do you prefer a narrative that shifts based on your gameplay choices, or something more linear that dictates the gameplay? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching UnCapt Gaming, and we hope to see you again soon.